Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Do you ever have dreams where you are dreaming and while you're dreaming, you almost know that this is something you're going to want to remember when you wake up? Well, I don't usually dream. I don't know about you. I'm not someone who, I guess they say we always dream or something, but we don't always remember the dreams, whatever it is. Very infrequently do I wake up having any recollection of what I dreamt about. I might remember 3 or 4 dreams a year. I'm not sure if that's like you or not. I know my wife, for example, dreams all the time, especially when she's pregnant. In any event, I've had a few dreams in my life where, as far as I can tell, as far as I can be certain, I do believe there was a spiritual element to them. I know that St. Augustine said to be careful about dreams, and so have other mystics and things like that. But at the same time, not that we ignore the fact that God or our guardian angel or something may speak to us in our sleep, or it may just be that we have a moment of contemplation while we're completely restful and we sort of realize something or see something a new way. So I'm not someone who's going to jump on every single dream as being a sign from God, because definitely I've had some weird dreams that were just wacky weirdness, like I'm sure all of you have, or totally banal dreams about walking through a field or whatever. But there have been a few moments in my life where I've had some dreams where I've thought, this is something interesting. And I'll tell you one quick story before I get into what happened last night. Years ago, and I won't give too many details because these things can be kind of personal, but years ago when I was just coming back to the faith, like I had just become a Catholic trying to live in a state of grace and go to confession and pray the rosary and really giving it a shot, I remember one night having a dream, and it was a very strange thing. All of a sudden, it was very clear to me that I had to wake up because something demonic was happening in my house, and it was like explicit that something like that was happening. And out of nowhere, I just woke up wide awake from this prompting in the dream, and lo and behold, there was some demonic shenanigans going on in the house. I'll leave those details, confidential, but if you've ever experienced, things moving and things like that around your house, knowing that there really is a demonic presence and it's clear and obvious, it was one of those moments. And I just started to pray the rosary and threw some holy water around, things like that. And it was very much a wake-up call for me as being the spiritual head of my household. And as I said, this was sort of early on in the beginnings of my coming back to the faith. So when that happens, the devil often has a tantrum because he's worried about losing one of his former residents, so to speak. And I haven't had a dream like that in a really long time. But last night, because that was about almost 8 years ago, but last night I had a dream that shook me. And I woke up and I took it as a sign. Whether it was from God or not, I don't know. But I do know that what was the contents of the dream was worth talking about and was perfectly in line with the Catholic faith. So here's the scene. I was, for some reason, at a Novus Ordo parish. And it's one that I used to go to a long time ago, although in typical dream fashion, things were kind of a little different. But it was that place, I could tell. And it was like the classic dream fashion where people seem to be lethargic and not moving quickly, and everyone's kind of like they're in a daze, and you're not really sure why certain things are happening. But in any case, I found myself sitting in the pew with my family, and the consecration came, and for some reason, the priest, when he went to consume the host, he didn't break it in half. And I don't know if, I assume they break it in half in the Novus Ordo, I'm pretty sure. But for some reason, this priest just didn't, and he sort of opened his mouth wide and shoved Holy Communion in and started chomping down, and some bits fell off out of his mouth and got onto his chin. That was weird enough, very strange, horrifying, and it was one of those things like in a dream where nobody seems to be noticing anything, and you're kind of looking around like, do you see what's happening? That kind of classic dream thing. And then for some reason I looked up, and my son, my oldest son, was on the altar as an altar server. And it was very out of place because he was dressed the way that he dresses as an altar server in the traditional mass, with the vestments and his hands, in the proper format and things, and very different than you sometimes see that in the Novus Ordo, but sometimes you don't. Anyway, especially the vestments. And it was so tragic. I look over at him, and I couldn't understand in the context of the dream why my son would be serving at the Novus Ordo. That's not going to happen. So it was out of nowhere, even in dreamland. And I was confused at that. And I thought, why is he up there? Why is he up there? And then he was supposed to walk across the altar for whatever. And he was looking at the floor and he realized that the only thing, if he stepped any further, he would step on the particles of the Holy Eucharist. And he was shaking and he looked at me with great sadness. Anyway, it was a terrible feeling. It was an absolutely terrible feeling. And it really did shake me when I woke up. Again, I'm not saying that God was speaking to me in my dreams. I'm just saying there was something about this that was really of the faith and worth talking about. And it was one of those moments where, you see the truth of the faith through the eyes of a child. My children, your children, I'm sure, have very simple faith. And I mean that in a good sense. Jesus tells us to have the heart of a child and to be like little children. And there's a reason for that, because they're not completely stained by all the problems of the world, and they're not distracted and things like that with silly things. And they see things very clearly and very plainly. You ever sit around the dinner table with your children, and it's such a refreshing and beautiful thing to hear their questions about God. Last night we're sitting around the table eating supper. My wife had prepared this beautiful roast thing, and we were just eating, and it was wonderful. And my little girl, my oldest girl, I should say, she's little, but she's my oldest girl. She's 6. And we're talking about whatever, the day, the kids went with mom. Where'd they go? Well, they went to the store and the thrift shop and the park and just had a good day, after school in the morning. And we were just talking. Dad was telling him what I was doing at work, and they were telling me what they did in the day, just your classic dinner table scenario. And out of nowhere, my little daughter, she just goes, "Daddy, what does God look like?" Out of nowhere. And I explained God, the Father, is pure spirit and so on and so forth. And so we have images that represent what he looks like, but I guess we won't really know if we can say what he looks like in that real sense until the beatific vision, etc. And she just kind of looked at me and said, "Okay, thanks, Daddy," and went back to eating her food. The children just have this simple faith. They just have this simple faith. And the simple faith of a child, in my dream, my son being the child, my oldest son, it absolutely broke my heart. It was absolutely terrifying. And although the dream was strange, it was strange. Like, there were 2 priests. One of them was wearing shorts and like a clerical suit, short sleeve shirt with a collar. It was not even for Novus Ordo, this was not how they're done. I know that. I'm not saying this is a representation of the Novus Ordo per se. I understand there are priests of the Novus Ordo who are not lunatics and don't do crazy things like that. I get that. And I know there are priests of the Novus Ordo who treat the Holy Eucharist better than that, obviously. But it got me thinking this morning. Yes, this dream was silly. I mean, it was a dream. It had the weird dreamland thing. It was like an Alice in Wonderland nightmare in a sense. Like, what's going on, Yes, it was weird. But even though it was a dramatic representation of what could happen in a situation of sacrilege, is the horror of what happens at your average Novus Ordo parish any different? Is it different? Yes, in this dream, there was an absurd situation that I've never seen. I've never seen the priest, eating the Holy Eucharist like cookies that fall out of his mouth. I've never seen that. And I don't think anyone's seen that. But it is the norm at virtually every single one. And please, if you have an exceptional parish, meaning a place where they do the Unicorn Novus Ordo and they use patens and things like that, please understand that the exception proves the rule. When people come to me and say, "That's not how it's done at my parish," yes, 1 in 100 proves the norm. So yes, it is the norm, even if yours is exceptional. That's why it's exceptional. It's an exception. It's not the norm. As compared to the traditional liturgy, either in the traditional Latin Mass or in the traditional Eastern rites. In the Eastern rites, obviously, the gold gilded spoon and things like that into the mouth. Excuse me. In the traditional Latin Mass, the paten on the tongue, very reverent. But what happens in the average Novus Ordo parish excuse me, it's a constant occasion for sacrilege, and hosts fall all the time. They do fall all the time. You know, I get lots of messages from people. It's been a long time since I was at the Novus Ordo, but of course I know that hosts fall all the time, and you know that. I mean, how many stories have you heard about sitting in the pew and opening up a hymn book and there's a host inside? I mean, I showed last year with World Youth Day in an article for 1 Peter 5 and also in a video, literal video footage of hosts falling at World Youth Day. It's a common experience for people who have been to World Youth Day to be walking away from receiving Holy Communion, and there are hosts on the ground that people are stepping on in the mud because it's all outdoors and it's hundreds of thousands of people or whatever. Last year when I watched World Youth Day, some of the mass footage, I remember seeing even the way the priests were receiving. There was an army of priests concelebrating, meaning they were sitting on the grass and they stood up and put their arms up for 2 minutes and then they concelebrated Mass. And when it was time to receive Holy Communion, because they're priests and have to receive under both species, they did intinction. So they dipped the Holy Eucharist, the body of Christ, into the blood of Christ. And what they were doing, they were just putting their hands out underneath the host as it was up so they can catch the drips, I guess, and then just popping Holy Communion in the mouth. It's like, okay, no big deal. If there's some drips, I'll lick them off my hands or wipe them on my shorts or whatever. This is the norm. This is the norm. And although the dream that I had was terrifying, and it was very sad in that way that dreams can really hit you, it was a dramatic version, but the horror of what happens at the average Novus Ordo parish is the same. It is. Because we have to believe as Catholics that every single particle of the Holy Eucharist contains the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. Now, obviously, human error is going to happen. We have this reverence for the Holy Eucharist, and we treat Christ as such for the benefit of not just the care that is due to God, but also because of the necessity for us to treat the Holy Eucharist this way to guard against the errors that attack the real presence. So Christ does not suffer physically in the Holy Communion reality. It's not like it hurts him when you eat his body. Okay, he's there under the appearance of bread and wine. So, no, it's not as if when someone steps on the Holy Eucharist, and I'm speaking in an objective sense, there have been mystics who have seen things that are very symbolic that suggest something different than what I'm saying. I'm just going off of the basic teachings of what the church teaches about Christ's suffering. No, it's not as if, when we step on particles that we are necessarily making a physical injury in the sense that we understand it as a human being. But that doesn't matter because a spiritual offense is infinitely worse than a physical offense. And this is something that is lost in the materialist, modernist Novus Ordo paradigm. This idea that not only do they reject protecting Christ physically as if it's not that big of a deal, they don't realize that their insistence on these abhorrent and sacrilegious communion practices are an even greater offense than the fact that Christ is dishonored in a physical sense. He's dishonored in a spiritual sense. This is the litany of the Sacred Heart. When we read in the litany of the Sacred Heart, Christ's heart bruised for our offenses. We don't believe that someone is going and hitting Christ physically in the heart right now as if, they're punching an organ. What we believe is that the heart of man, where the center of the man is, where who he is there. We talk about the heart being that, and the Sacred Heart of Christ. There's a mystical reality to this, of course, and we bruise his innermost being by our offenses and our sins, and that's what happens at a sacrilegious experience of Holy Communion. So we have to ask ourselves, where did this come from? I mean, how did we get to this place where in the norm, traditionally all over the world, we go from reverent reception of Holy Communion to the new reception, where it's a complete and utter disaster, where, yes, my dream was dramatic, but it really expressed the reality as it really is, even if it's not as dramatic as it was in my dream. But the offense is the same, because any carelessness with the Holy Eucharist is extremely offensive, whether or not it's dramatized in a dream or it's just, well, Holy Communion is given out by, Susan from the parish council, and sometimes the odd one drops or whatever. So-and-so puts it in his pocket as he walks away, which something happens all the time. And we're going to talk about the origins of where Holy Communion in the hand came from and why it's Protestant and anti-Catholic in origin. And there's a great article by the late, great John Venari, one of the great Catholic writers of our time, died too soon, as they say, just like Michael Davies, really. And he wrote an article at this point, almost 30 years ago, I think, and it was in the Old School Catholic Family News, and I found a copy of it online. And we're going to read through great portions of, or important portions of that together, that show the origins of Holy Communion being a Protestant heresy, being an attack on the real presence. And we're going to go through that in just a second. But I'm going to continue that part of the show on the other side. So if you're seeing this on YouTube and you want to watch the rest, you're going to have to click the link underneath for signing up as a YouTube member or signing up for the Substack. Personally, I recommend the Substack because you get more goodies over there, because it's also a place for articles and things. So I thank you for your support, and I will see you on the other side.